He opened the file for the last time, his hand trembling slightly, even though the paper was cold, impersonal, clinical. The report was stamped confidential, and at the bottom, in a shaky signature, were his words, the words a doctor swore he'd never publish. But after all these years, after all the silence, he had nothing left to lose. Most people believed that Marilyn Monroe's demons belonged to the tabloids, whispered scandals, cruel rumors, gossip dressed up as truth. They believed her tears came from jealousy, addiction, heartbreak, from a life spent chasing approval she never earned. But the truth, the real truth, lived behind sealed hospital doors and unspoken diagnoses. He had been her doctor, not a psychiatrist, not one of the glamorous names associated with her films, just a physician assigned to her for routine checkups and complaints she quietly muttered in private. But over time, those routine visits became emergency appointments. Her complaints changed, from sinus pain and sleepless nights to tremors in her hands, fatigue so deep she described it as a darkness behind the eyes. At first, he chalked it up to stress, exhaustion, the life she lived. Who was he to second-guess it? Hollywood was built on pressure, on demand, on bending reality until it broke. Pills, potions, injections, whatever it took to keep her on schedule. The studios never asked where the pain came from. They only asked for performance. In his notes, hidden, locked, never shared, he recorded symptoms no diva would dare acknowledge. Unexplained bruises, sudden weight loss, episodes of disorientation after late-night shoots, tremors in her limbs that worsened on cold studio sets, and always, a faint but unmistakable glow of melancholy behind her eyes. He ordered tests. Basic labs first, nothing alarming. Then more specific ones. Endocrine, neurologic, hormone panels, thyroid levels, liver enzymes, kidney function. He checked for everything, every toxin, every imbalance, every possibility. Each test came back, within normal limits. But she didn't get better. The studio dismissed his concerns. She's fine. She's just tired. Put her back in makeup. The publicist insisted it was all in her head. Even friends told her to pull it together. He believed her. He believed in her humanity. He believed she deserved the truth. And then came the night she lay unconscious in his arms. She arrived at the clinic trembling, her skin pale, her pulse racing. She whispered, barely audible, about pins and needles crawling under her skin. She cried when she tried to stand. She couldn't remember where she was. She didn't know who she was supposed to meet the next morning. He admitted her. He ran tests again. More invasive this time. He stayed by her side through 4 drips, blood draws, observation hours, questioning. She drifted in and out of awareness. At one point, she opened her eyes and looked straight at him, confusion soft in her gaze. "I don't even know who I am anymore," she said. She didn't mention the fame, the cameras, the expectations. She only asked to be treated like a person. The morning after, the final labs came back. The diagnosis arrived with an unforgiving clarity. Chronic adrenal insufficiency, a form of pituitary dysfunction. Her body was failing at regulating stress hormones. The endless demands, the sleepless nights, the pills and fixes, they had worn down something essential. Her stress wasn't just emotional. It was chemical, physiological. He realized how cruel the myth had been, how dangerous the silence. Because once a star is illuminated by light, no one asks what burns beneath. They only notice when the flame sputters. He confronted the studio. He handed them the chart. He warned them. If she didn't rest, if she didn't slow down, if she didn't get proper treatment, she could collapse again. Maybe permanently. They looked at him like he had lost his mind. "She's Marilyn Monroe," they said. "She cannot afford to be sick." He left their office with a clean conscience, but a heavy heart. He told her. She closed her eyes, exhaled slowly, not from relief, but from the cold realization that her body had finally caught up with her spirit. She paused, then whispered something he never forgot. "So that's why the world sees me laughing, and I'm dying inside." He prescribed rest, withdrawal from all medication, strict schedule, diet, therapy, treatment. He told her, as a human being, not a star, that healing would take time. But she refused, not because she didn't want to, but because she couldn't. The next film, the next call, the next deadline pushed on her like gravity. She made arrangements, promised she'd try, Promised Friday. Promised. He never heard from her again. Days later, the news broke. Headlines screamed of a tragic death. The story was clean, an overdose. A heart that gave out. Fame's cruel irony wrapped neatly in scandalous print. No mention of illness. No mention of breakdown. Just a sensational story the public was ready to consume. And every time he read her obituary, saw her image on magazine covers, smiling, glamorous, eternal, he felt a quiet rage. Their lie had killed her, not the pills. Their demands had killed her, not the world. He kept the records, the labs, the notes, the nights described in blue ink, grief distilled in each line. But he never spoke. Not then. Not for years. Because what proof was a doctor's note against the machinery of myth? A scrap of paper against a golden legend? But now, those files are public. The diagnosis is out. The truth, the one no star's publicist would dare admit, is exposed not as gossip, but as medicine, as suffering, as what happens when humanity is traded for image, when illness is treated like weakness, when the world demands brightness without allowing darkness to exist. Because her secret fight was never against addiction. It wasn't against the tabloids. It wasn't even against the cameras. Her fight was inside her body, inside her chemistry, a battle for survival that no spotlight could heal, no contract could fix, no fame could silence. And the doctor who finally admitted it, after decades of silence, wants the world to know this. She was not failing herself. She was failing because the world refused to see what was hurting her. She didn't die because she lost hope. She died because she stopped believing hope would help. And maybe, just maybe, now someone will finally understand. What really killed Marilyn Monroe was not the myth she became. It was the frail, wounded woman she always was. He remembered the way she looked the last time he saw her. Not glamorous, not glowing beneath studio lights, but small beneath the weight of her own exhaustion. She had come into his office wearing oversized sunglasses, not to hide from fans, but to hide how much she'd cried the night before. When she removed them, her eyelids were swollen, her skin pale, her voice barely a whisper. "Is something wrong with me that I can't see?" she asked. He wanted to lie. He wanted to say she was just tired, just overworked, just pushed a little too hard, that her body would bounce back the way it always had. But he couldn't do it. Not anymore. "There's something wrong," he said gently, "but it's not your fault." She stared at him, searching his face for the judgment she expected. It wasn't there. He looked at her the way no one else did, without the hunger of a manager, without the pressure of a director, without the awe of a fan. He looked at her like a woman who deserved answers. "Can it be fixed?" she asked. He hesitated. "Yes, but not if you keep living like this." She knew exactly what he meant. The schedules, the pills, the sleepless nights, the emotional burdens, the loneliness disguised as fame, the terror of disappointing the entire world. Her hands trembled. She clasped them together to make it less obvious. "What happens if I don't stop?" she whispered. He met her gaze with painful honesty. "Your body will give out before your spirit does." Her breath caught, because she knew he wasn't speaking metaphorically. She felt it every morning when she woke up shaking, every night when her thoughts slipped out of focus, every moment she stood on set feeling like a ghost in her own skin. Then she said something he would think about for the rest of his life. "I wish someone had told me sooner." "You wouldn't have believed them," he said softly. She looked down. "No, I think I would have. I'm more breakable than they think." That was the truth she never said in public. The truth she never allowed to exist in interviews. The truth the world refused to believe because they liked the legend more than the woman. She stood to leave, wobbling slightly when she took her first step. He moved to help her, but she lifted a hand. "No, I want to walk out on my own." That was Marilyn, brave in the quietest ways, stubborn in all the wrong ones, determined even while unraveling. At the door, she paused and looked back at him. "Do you think I could ever live a normal life?" she asked. He didn't know how to answer. Could she? Would the world let her? Would she let herself? He chose the only truth that mattered. "I think you deserve one." Her eyes warmed for a moment. Gratitude, hope, something softer than either. Then she left. He never saw her in person again. When the autopsy results were released, he read every line with shaking hands. The world fixated on the drugs, the dosage, the scandal, the whispered theories. But he saw something else, something no one else cared to understand. Her electrolytes were abnormal. Her cortisol levels inconsistent. Her organs showed signs of long-term systemic stress. The very signs he had warned them about. He wanted to scream, to tear the newspapers apart, to go on record and tell the whole world. She was sick. She was sick. Why won't any of you admit she was sick? But Hollywood didn't want sickness. They wanted tragedy. Tragedy sells. Tragedy immortalizes. Tragedy makes icons. Illness makes humans. And Marilyn Monroe was not allowed to be human. Years passed before he spoke, before he released the files, before anyone cared enough to listen. By then, history had already shaped her story into a myth that fit neatly inside a headline. They said she overdosed. They said she spiraled. They said she collapsed under pressure. But no one asked what the pressure did to her body. No one wanted to know the truth. Except him. He revealed everything not for fame, not for vindication, but because he believed she deserved her humanity back. She wasn't fragile because she was weak. She was fragile because she was fighting a battle her body couldn't sustain. She wasn't reckless. She was untreated. She wasn't doomed. She was abandoned. And the final, quiet admission he wrote in his report, the one sentence the world was never meant to see, was the one that haunted him most. If she had been allowed to rest, she would have lived. That is what he finally confessed, not to accuse the world of killing her, but to remind it that she tried to survive. Not Marilyn Monroe, the icon, but Norma Jean, the patient, the woman, the body, the heart, the life slowly slipping through her fingers while no one noticed. No one except him. And now, finally, the world knows what she was truly fighting. He carried the weight of that truth for decades, through sleepless nights, through interviews he refused, through anniversaries marked not by celebration, but by regret. The world moved on from Marilyn, building documentaries and conspiracy theories, biographies and dramatizations, each one insisting they alone understood her. But none of them knew the quiet, medical reality that had been sitting in his locked drawer all those years. He remembered the day he almost destroyed the files. He had opened the cabinet, pulled out the folder with her name printed neatly across the tab, and stared at it for a long time. The papers inside represented the most painful truth of his career, not because he failed her medically, but because the world refused to listen when it mattered. He placed the file on his desk. He stood, paced, sat again. He thought about her laugh, the one she used when she was trying to convince everyone she was fine. He thought about the way she would sit on the exam table, legs dangling like a child's, even though she carried the weight of an empire on her shoulders. He thought about how her hands shook when she believed no one was looking. He couldn't throw it away. He couldn't erase the only proof of the battle she fought in silence. The truth mattered. Her truth mattered. So he kept the file. And when he finally shared it, reluctantly, softly, quietly, he didn't do it with a press conference. He didn't sit on talk shows. He didn't sell the story. He simply handed the documents to a colleague he trusted, someone who promised to preserve the facts without sensationalizing them. The colleague read them carefully and looked up with stunned eyes. She was this sick, he asked. She was fighting every day, the doctor said. And no one understood. Why didn't you speak sooner? He gave the only answer that ever made sense. She didn't need the world to know while she was alive. She needed the world to understand after it was too late. Because Marilyn's illness, the chemical imbalance, the endocrine failure, the adrenal collapse, was more than a diagnosis. It was the missing piece in a story the world insisted on turning into tragedy, scandal, mystery. He didn't want to clear his own conscience. He wanted to restore her dignity. He remembered something else too. Something small, something he never wrote down. A moment near the end, during one of her last visits. She was sitting on the table, staring at her reflection in the metal tray, tracing her fingertip around the outline of her face distorted in the shine. "Do you think people will remember me?" she asked, eyes lowered. He had smiled gently. "People already remember you." "No," she whispered. "I mean, will anyone remember me? Not the one in magazines. Not the one they want me to be. Me." He didn't answer right away. He considered it carefully, the way he approached every question she asked. Not clinically, but humanly. "I think one day someone will," he said. "Someone who looks past the spotlight. Someone who understands light only exists because of the shadows behind it." She blinked slowly, tears forming but not falling. "I hope so," she said. "I don't want to disappear." He touched her shoulder lightly, a gesture he had never dared before. "You're not disappearing," he said. "You're just tired." She smiled at that, a real smile. But when she left that day, he knew, deep down, that she was slipping further from the world that claimed to love her. After her death, he became obsessed with one question. If someone had believed her pain sooner, would she still be alive? He replayed every symptom, every appointment, every ignored warning. He replayed the nights she arrived trembling, the mornings she looked hollow, the afternoons she pretended to be fine. He replayed the moment he told the studio she needed rest, and the way they brushed him aside like he was interrupting profit. And the hardest part, the part that became unbearable, was knowing she trusted him more than she trusted anyone else. Please don't let them say it was just the pills, she told him once. It's not just the pills. He promised her he would make sure the truth survived. For years, he failed that promise. But now, finally, his confession, the medical reality, not the myth, is the only piece of her story untouched by glamour or scandal. His final written line, found in the margin of her chart in handwriting smaller than the rest, was a sentence he never meant anyone else to read. Asterisk, she didn't die because she gave up. She died because we didn't give her permission to rest. Asterisk, with that truth now revealed, Marilyn's legacy changes, not erased, not diminished, but humanized. She wasn't weak. She wasn't reckless. She wasn't doomed. She was fighting a silent, invisible illness that no one bothered to understand. And in the end, the doctor who finally admitted it didn't do so to absolve himself. He did it because the world had spent too long admiring her beauty and too little time acknowledging her suffering. Now, at last, her secret fight has a voice. Now, someone finally remembers her.